world's production. The work which has been started by the Agricultural Department in Trinidad of recording the yield of individual trees has shown that great differences occur. Further, it has generally been observed that the heavy-bearing trees of the first year have continued to be the heavy bearers, and the poor-yielding trees have remained poor during subsequent years. The report rightly concludes that the question of detecting the poor-bearing trees on an estate and having them replaced by trees raised from selected stock, or budded or grafted trees of known prolific and other good qualities, is deserving of the most serious consideration by planters. The kind of cacao that manufacturers like. Planters have suggested to me that if the users and producers of cacao could be brought together, it would be to their mutual advantage. Permit me to conceive a meeting and report an imaginary conversation. Planter: You know we planters work a little in the dark. We don't know quite what to strive after. Tell me exactly what kind of cacao the manufacturers want. Manufacturer: Every buyer and manufacturer has his tastes and preferences and... Planter: Don't hedge. Manufacturer: The cacao of each producing area has its special characters, even as the wine from a country, and part of the good manufacturer's art is the art of blending. Planter: What, good with bad? Manufacturer: No, good of one type with a good of another type. Planter: What do you mean exactly by good? Manufacturer: By good I mean large, ripe, well-cured beans. By indifferent I mean unripe and unfermented. By abominable I mean germinated, mouldy, and grubby beans. Happily the last class is a quite small one. Planter: You don't mean to tell me that only the good cacao sells? Manufacturer: Unfortunately, no. There are users of inferior beans. Practically all the cacao produced, good and indifferent, is bought by someone. Most manufacturers prefer the fine, healthy, well-fermented kinds. Planter: Well fermented! They have a strange way of showing their preference. Why, they often pay more for Guayaquil than they do for Granada cacao. Yet Guayaquil is never properly fermented, whilst that from Granada estates is perfectly fermented. Manufacturer: Agreed. Just as you would pay more for a badly trained thoroughbred than for a well-trained mongrel. It's the breed they pay for. The Guayaquil breed is peculiar. There is nothing else like it in the world. You might think the tree has been grafted onto a spice tree. It has a fine characteristic aroma, which is so powerful that it masks the presence of a high percentage of unfermented beans. However, if Guayaquil cacao was well fermented, it would, subject to the iron laws of supply and demand, fetch a still higher price, and there would not be the loss there is in a wet season when the Guayaquil cacao, being unfermented, goes mouldy. I think in Granada they plant for high yield and not for quality, for the bean is small and approaches the inferior Calabacillo breed. Its value is maintained by an amazing evenness and uniform excellence during curing. The way in which it is prepared for the market does great credit to the planters. Planter: They don't clay there, do they? Manufacturer: No, and yet it is practically impossible to find a mouldy bean in Granada estates cacao. Evidently claying is not a necessity in Granada. Planter: Ha ha! By that I suppose you insinuate that it is not a necessity in Trinidad, where the curing is also excellent? Or in Venezuela? What is the buyer's objection to claying? Manufacturer: Simply that claying is camouflage. Actually, the buyer doesn't mind so long as the clay is not too generously used. He objects to paying for beans and getting clay. However, it's really too bad to color up with clay the black cacao from diseased pods. It might deceive even an experienced broker. Planter: Ha ha! Then it's a very sinful practice. I don't think that ever gets beyond the local tropical market. I know the merchants judge largely by the skin, but I thought the London broker... Manufacturer: You see, it's like this. Just as you associate a certain label with a particularly good brand of cigar, so the planter's mark on the bag and the external appearance of the beans influence the broker by long association. But just as you cannot truly judge a cigar by the picture on the box, so the broker has to consider what is under the shell of the bean. One or two manufacturers go further, but don't trust merely to tasting with their eyes. They only come to a conclusion when they have roasted a sample. Planter: But a buyer can get a shrewd idea without roasting, surely. You agree? Well, what exactly does he look for? Manufacturer: Depends what nationality the bean is. I mean, whether it was grown in Venezuela, Brazil, Trinidad, or the Gold Coast. In general, he likes beans with a good break, that is, beans which, under the firm pressure of a thumb and forefinger, break into small crisp nibs. Closeness or cheesiness are danger signals, warnings of lack of fermentation. So is a slate-colored interior. He prefers a pale, even-colored interior, cinnamon, chocolate, or café color, and planter: One moment. I've heard before of planters being told to ferment and cure until the bean is a cinnamon color. Why, man, you couldn't get a pale brown interior with beans of the Forastero or Calabacillo type if you fermented them to rottenness. Manufacturer: True. Well, if the breed on your plantation is purple Forastero, and more than half of the cacao in the world is, you must develop as much brown in the beans as possible. They should have the characteristic refreshing odor of raw cacao, together with a faint vinegary odor. The buyers much dislike any foreign smell, any moldy, hammy, or cheesy odor. Planter: And where do the foreign odors come from? Manufacturer: That's debatable. Some come from bad fermentations, due to dirty fermentaries, abnormal temperatures, or unripe cacao. Some come from smoky or imperfect artificial drying. Some come from mold. Unfermented cacao is liable to go moldy. So is germinated or over-ripe cacao with broken shells. Some cacao unfortunately gets wet with sea water. There always seems to me something pathetic in the thought of finely cured cacao being drowned in sea water as it goes out in open boats to the steamer. Planter: You see, we haven't piers and jetties everywhere, and often it's a long journey to them. Well, you've told me the buyers note break, color, and aroma. Anything else? Manufacturer: They like large beans, partly because largeness suggests fineness, and partly because with large beans the percentage of shell is less. Small flat beans are very wasteful and unsatisfactory, and they are nearly all shell and very difficult to separate from the shell. Planter: When there's a drought we can't help ourselves. We produce quantities of small flat beans. Manufacturer: It must be trying to be at the mercy of the weather. However, the weather doesn't prevent the dirt being picked out of the beans. Buyers don't like more than 0.5% of rubbish. I mean stones, dried twig-like pieces of pulp, dust, etc., left in the cacao. Neither do they like to see cobs, that is, 2 or more beans stuck together, nor. Planter: How about gloss? Manufacturer: The beauty of a polished bean attracts, although they know the beauty is less than skin deep. Planter: And washing? Manufacturer: In my opinion washing is bad. Leaves the shell too fragile. I believe in Hamburg they used to pay more for washed beans, although very little. I suppose less than 5% of the world's cacao is washed. But in London many buyers prefer the great unwashed. However, brokers are conservative, and would probably look on unwashed Ceylon with suspicion. Planter: Well, I have been very interested in everything you have said, and I think every planter should strive to produce the very best he can. But he does not get much encouragement. Manufacturer: How was that? Planter: There is insufficient difference between the price of the best and the common. Manufacturer: Unfortunately,